All right, good afternoon. We're going to talk about diagnostic testing this afternoon. Now, diagnostic testing is a really important part of what we do for a student. There are sometimes things that we do to a student, but diagnostic testing is something that we actually do for a student. And so it's important that you understand how to do it, what it is, and why we do it. So the first law of learning comes out of Romans chapter 12, verses 5 and 6. So we, being many, having gifts differing according to the grace that is given to us, acknowledges that all pupils are different. We're all created individually. I'm not like you and you're not like me. And praise God for that sometimes, hey? Because if we were all the same, wouldn't it be awful? We wouldn't have the variety of skills and personalities and things that we need to make life actually really livable. It's the differing personalities and differing skill sets and things that really make our life good. And so God made us all different, and so in the Learning Centre, every child is going to be different. You know, even identical twins will diagnose quite differently sometimes. So it's quite amazing. The first law of learning is the student must be placed on a level of curriculum where he can perform. Now I'm going to go over some of the things that I said in our very first session where I talked about why we diagnose children. So you're going to hear some of that again. If we don't diagnose children and we just place them in a spot in the curriculum, oh yeah, they're this old, we're going to put them here. We have no idea of what they know, and more importantly, what they don't know. So diagnostic testing tells us what a child knows and what they don't know. Now, before we can place them on a level where they can perform, we have to know what they can do. That just makes sense, doesn't it? We can't place them on a level where they can best perform if we don't know what they can do. So that's fairly logical. Appropriate diagnosis and prescription is central to a student's confidence, his ability to progress independently, and his mastery of the material. Now, what does diagnosis have to do with confidence? Well, actually a great deal. Because if you just plonk a student somewhere in the curriculum and the work is too hard for them, you actually erode their confidence and they become their attitude to learning changes. They may previously have been a good learner, but they will become a difficult learner or somebody who doesn't like to learn because it becomes beyond their ability. So it has a huge amount to do with the student's confidence. Their ability to progress independently is also affected if they are actually not at the right level in the curriculum, if they don't start at the right place, because they can't go on without help because they don't have the foundation on which to build. Now, imagine that when we're educating a child, it's like building a brick wall. Now, you've all seen a brick wall, so you know that the bricks are placed one level on top of the other level on top of the other level. What happens if there's a level missing? Well, the wall either stops there or it's not really going to stand for very long without the security of that level of bricks being there. It's not going to be able to stand. And that's what happens to our children in schools often. They get to a certain level and you will find that there are some children whose progress actually stops at that level if they're taken on and they can't go and they don't understand that. They don't have that firm foundation. Some of them, their actual learning will stop there and they will very rarely progress, or they'll only make small progressions. And that's really sad. It shouldn't happen. And some will make progress, but they'll make sporadic progress, or they'll get to a point and they can't go any further because they don't have that foundation. So a brick wall without that level in is sooner or later going to crumble. It's going to fall down. So we need to make sure that their educational foundation is very firm and strong. And that's what happens when we diagnose. So we need to have mastery of the material so the student can go on. Okay, so the first thing that we do is that we have a reading readiness test, which I don't think I actually got that. And this determines young children's readiness to read. The reading readiness test, which is now called the ABC's pre-test. I'm just looking at this and going, yes, this is the old reading readiness test. It's now called the ABC's pre-test, and this is what it looks like. The child needs to get 80% and above before they're placed in the Learning to Read program. Now, there have been some changes to this test, and there is a test A and a test B. Test A is observations. So this is what the supervisor observes when the child comes in for testing. And there's some specific tests here. Now, on test A, they need to get 100% before they're ready to read. This is actually showing that they are cognitively, or their brain is developed enough for them to be able to learn to read. Test B, they need to pass all 18 points before they can go into the Learn to Read program. So the test itself hasn't changed. So this is still the same test that it's been for many years, but there is additional requirements at the front to test the children. Now, it's important that you do this because a lot of our schools don't do it. Unfortunately, a lot of countries say that because a child is a certain age, they are ready to learn to read, or ready to go to, or they must go to school. And in most schools' minds, that means that they must learn to read, whether they're developmentally ready or not. We have a way of testing to say, yes, they are developmentally ready. What do you do with the child who is not developmentally ready to go to school? A lot of our schools actually run preschools and do the kindergarten with AC and Christie, which is a pre-reading program. And that's a 12-month program, and children can go into that. Now, some parents get upset if you tell them that their child is not ready to learn to read. It doesn't mean that the child is developmentally delayed. It doesn't mean that there is a problem with the child or that they're going to have problems at school. It doesn't mean any of those things. It means at that particular point in time, the child is not ready. You can bring that child, you can start them in the kindergarten process, bring them back in 3 months, retest them, and they might be ready to go. But it depends whether your school can then run another ABCs program in that time. So the regular ABCs program takes 16 weeks. Excuse me. So you can actually, if you want to, run an ABCs program every 16 weeks or twice a year, really. You can run an ABCs program if you want to, and if you're allowed to have a mid-year intake. But most schools actually don't run that way. Sorry, excuse me. But it is a good way to run if you possibly can. If your school is large enough, or if you have the need and you have the facilities and the staff to be able to do that, then you can do that. Okay. So below 80%, the child should go into the kindergarten with AC and Christie program. So that is the pre-reading program. Children do not learn to read in that program. They learn the letter sounds, so they learn all the phonetic sounds of the letters, and they learn those same sounds are going to be repeated in the ABCs, in the 16 weeks ABCs class, and they are actually then going to learn to read and write in that class. So that's how that works. Okay, so we're going to skip fairly quickly through some of this because you can read it. We need to prepare the materials. So we have, that's the ABCs with AC and Christie. There are also other diagnostic tests, and we'll have a look at those later. Actually, I think there's 2 of those there. There are. I was thinking, wow, that maths one's thick. It never used to be that thick. Okay, so there's maths, literacy, word building, and English diagnostic tests for students who can already read. And I'm not going to go into the when you start to test and all of that. You do that when you do the procedures manual. So I'm going to talk to you about how you set up for the testing and all that sort of stuff. And then we're going to talk about a bit more about why you test. So subject-specific diagnostic tests measure a student's knowledge and skills in a particular discipline. So they are subject-specific. The English diagnostic test, which is this one, this tests English grammar. So that's all it tests. It doesn't test their knowledge of English literature. It doesn't test their knowledge of anything else. It is simply a test of grammar. Do they understand the grammar enough to progress through the paces at a certain level? So that's that one. The maths diagnostic test, funnily enough, tests basic numeracy. So it tests mathematical skills. What can they do? What do they understand? What don't they understand? So for example, if they don't know their 7 times table, you can tell that through this diagnostic test. So, and this is one reason that we do not like people to do the online testing. There is online testing through ACE, but with the online testing, all it does is it spits out which PACE numbers you need, and you can't actually see which specific skills the students are lacking in. So you could be requiring them to do a whole heap of extra work for something that is quite a small detail that you could teach them in 10 minutes and then get them to re-diagnose and skip 5 paces. So we really don't like, and you'll see how it works when you look at these. So we don't like you to do the online testing at all. So there is a senior maths diagnostic test for 73 to 1108, and it tests obviously higher literacy skills. Right, this is the interesting one. Social studies and science diagnostic tests and literature and creative writing are all in here. This is actually a literacy diagnostic test. This tests comprehension skills. It does not test science knowledge. It does not test social studies knowledge. It does not test your knowledge of literature. It simply says that the child has comprehension skills at this level. So if a child diagnoses at 109.6 on this one, if they get really good scores all the way through and they're 10 years old, it does not mean that you can then say, oh, they don't need to do science, social studies or literature, because this is not testing content, it's simply testing comprehension. Now we have had schools in the past who've taken children off science and social studies because they passed this test really easily, so they didn't need to do it. Oops. So it's not about the content. This one is simply about testing comprehension skills. If you're using Readmaster, which is a reading program which is computerised, the Readmaster diagnostic test only tests comprehension and the speed that you read at. So, and it's something that I recommend that if you have English as a second language, or if you have children who are slow learners or slow readers, Readmaster is a wonderful program that really helps the students to improve their comprehension and improve their speed at reading. So that's a really good program. Word building diagnostic test only tests spelling. It doesn't test anything else. So it doesn't test their knowledge of how our language is put together. It doesn't test whether they know about prefixes, suffixes, plurals, all of those things that are done in the word building paces. So again, even if they diagnose really high on this, they would be put at their comprehension, their chronological level for English, social studies and science. Okay. Now, if they are really good at those subjects, they're going to go ahead in those subjects anyhow, but we need to make sure that they're actually getting the content that they need to have. We don't want to be handing out certificates when they're in Year 12 saying that they have done ACE all the way through and they have a really good scientific knowledge, when for 5 years they didn't do any science. So they have no real grounding in it. So we need to be careful about that. Okay. Now there is another test, and you will have read about it as you're doing your PACES. This is the Coordination Development Test. This is excellent. This is more about skills that help the child. So it's testing gross motor skills and fine motor skills, left-right dominance, all sorts of things like that. These tests are fabulous. I used to do them with all of my kids, not just the little kids. And on the back, there's a skills conversion chart at the back here, which gives you things to do. So for example, if the child is lacking in balance, so if the child, scores really poorly in balance, these are a remediation program, or exercises or games or things that you can do that are going to improve that child's balance. So, well, what does balance matter in the scheme of things? Well, it can affect all sorts of things. So, if a child has not got good balance, it often means that they have really poor motor skills as well. So that's something that you can look at. But if they have really poor hand-eye coordination, here are the exercises that you can do. Now, and all these exercises are either in here or they're in the ABCs with AC and Christie manual. So that's a really good, another test that is excellent that you can use, and I suggest you do use it. Okay, so when you're going to conduct diagnostic testing, you need to make sure that you've got a conducive environment. Is it a nice place for the kids to come and be tested? Now, one of the things that I want you to remember is that when these children come into your school, they are children that have not done ACE before. They're new into your school. So coming into your school is like coming into a foreign land. You've got all these little boxes that people sit in. You've got this different language that you use. You've got all of this jargon that they don't understand. So it's really scary for them. Don't put them in offices. Let them sit at a table to do their testing, and don't stand over them. I was in a school that was doing diagnostic testing one time, and the teacher was standing like this at the end of the table watching all the students, and I'm thinking, that would really put me off. So you can be hovering around, if you are a supervisor in a learning centre, there is always something you can be doing. You're cutting out something or preparing something. You're in the room, but you're occupied so that you're there if they need help, but you're not hovering over them, okay? So that's really important. You can have a group of students diagnosed at the same time, and that's actually the best way to do it, because if there's just one, they feel like they're, it can be very intimidating. But if you do have just one, that's fine. Provide a brief orientation and of the practical handling and the purpose of the diagnostic test. Don't say to the child, we're going to give you a test. As soon as you hear the word test or exam, do you know what happens?
Shut down, lock up.
Yeah, most people get anxious. Most people get anxious about it. So, you know, if I hand this to you and say, this is the test you're going to do, and you've never seen anything like it before, and you open it and it's got all this stuff here and all these yellow bits, and this looks a bit scary to me. And remember, these are children. It's very foreign to them. So you need to talk to them. This is the book that's going to tell me what you know. And I want you to show me what you can do as much as you can. These yellow bits, you don't have to worry about them. They're my problem. So just ignore them. See these questions? These are the ones that you do. Okay? And if you can't do one on this page, then go to the next page, because you might know the answer on the next page and you might be able to do 5 or 6 more pages. And then when they start the test, make sure that they've got the idea of what they're doing. Because remember, this is quite a foreign system to them. It's different to what they've seen. Offer undivided attention by the guided assistance of a watching supervisor. Now, when we say that, we don't mean standing over them and watching. We mean being in the room. You can be doing something that doesn't allow, I could be sitting, I would normally sit just a little bit away from the table with something to do so that I was occupied, but I could keep an eye on what was happening. And if you see the student faltering, go to them. Don't wait for them to ask you. Remember, they don't know you. They don't know who you are. And this is all strange. So a lot of them won't ask for help. So if you see them faltering, you see they've stopped or they're flipping through pages and don't know what else to do, go over to them. Hi, can I help you with this? Wow, look how much you've done. Can you do a little bit more, or are you stuck? If they're stuck, don't give them answers, don't help them, because remember, this is about what they know. And start the student at an appropriate point in the test. All right, if the student is 14 years old and can read, do we need to start them here where they do the ABCs? No, we don't. And if you go through the procedures manual, or if you read the instructions in the front here, it tells you very simply, it tells you right here, if you are in 1st, 2nd, 3rd or 4th grade, start on page 1. If you are in 5th grade or above, start on page 13. Okay? So it tells you very clearly, but time after time I see these tests and they've started a 15-year-old on page 1. So they've done 13 pages that they really didn't need to do. It's a bit silly, isn't it? So please read the instructions. It's really important. Okay, schedule the timetable over 7 days. Now, if you look at this, this is actually a fair amount of work to expect a student to get through. They're not going to get through that in one session. So don't expect them to finish their diagnostic testing in one day. It takes 3 to 4 to 5, even 5 days to get diagnostic testing done. You shouldn't have any longer than 45-minute blocks, and then give them a short break, doing something, have an activity prepared for them to do, take them outside, let them run around, let them do something else, because they can't have that intense focus for longer than that period of time. For younger children, you may have to break it up into 20-minute blocks because they just don't have the ability to stay focused for that amount of time. If possible, if school is in, if your school is going around you and you're diagnosing, Schedule the breaks with other students so they can have some interaction with the other students and meet students at this new school that they're going to go to. And set a clear time for finishing. Have something ready for the students who finish early, something for them to do. Okay, now when you score the diagnostic test, you use red pen, you write the number of correct answers, you circle the PACE number that has below the minimum score. So what we're looking for when they've done the test and we're marking these yellow boxes here say PACE 1024, possible score 6, minimum score 5. So, I mean, and it varies. Sometimes, you know, possible score 29, minimum score 24. So it'll tell you the possible score and the minimum score. If they score below the minimum score, that's what we're interested in, because that shows that they don't have mastery of whatever it is in that PACE. File the test for further diagnostic testing after the student is established. Now, remember I said that this is all very foreign to these students. The student might be in your schools, the student has finished the test, you do the diagnosis, write the prescription for that child, which is just their individual plan, okay, of what they need to do. Now, you might have gap paces and their paces that, like, the student might have circled 1040, 1043, 1056, 1058, 1059, 1060. When they get 3 together, that is their performance level. Anything prior to that, we call a gap pace, or it's showing that there's something missing in their foundational learning. Now, what we normally do is that's when you look at this and you find out exactly what it is that the child doesn't know. Okay, so if the child doesn't know what here it says, choose and write the acting word. Now, a child might not know that terminology. So they might present not passing this PACE simply because they don't understand what we're asking for in the question. So, all of us cheese, all of us cheer. What's the acting word? Cheer. So, you might find that if you actually look at the test and what they've not understood, you might be talking to that child. What I would do in that case, I would say to them, well, if I were asking you to do something, a doing word, because in Australia and in most of the South Pacific, we don't call verbs acting words, we call them doing words. So it's just the different terminology that can make a huge difference. Now, you might find when you talk to that student that some of those paces that they've been diagnosed as gap paces, actually the child does know the answer. They just didn't understand the terminology or the words that we used or the way that we asked the question. So I recommend that after you have looked at what the child has done, that then you go and look at the PACE, and when they come in for testing next, or when they actually start at school, talk to them. Find out what they do know. Again, this is all very foreign to them and very different to what they've done anywhere else. When they start school, you might actually find out that something that they've really messed up in the test, they actually do know how to do. Don't make them do unnecessary work. If they know how to do it, then say, wow, that's great, you actually don't need to finish this. I think we can scrap that one and go on to the next one. Don't hold them back, particularly if they're way behind in their work, which a lot of the students coming into our schools are way behind in their work. If they're way behind in their work, we need to push them through as quickly as we can while not stinting on what they actually need to do. So we need to be careful about that. So use the result to identify and prescribe gap paces and the performance level. Enter the result on the supervisor's progress card. List gap paces and PACE numbers at the performance level for math and English. List PACE numbers, that should say chronological at the chronological level for science, social studies and word building. And never ever write their prescription at first in pen. Write it in pencil because it could change. Now, this is where the slides stop, and I'm going to just talk you through some of these things. This should be kept. It should be used only for one student. Now, when Islanders, I will talk to you about this separately, but it should only be used for one student. What happens is when you've finished with this should be filed in the student's file, because the supervisor at some later point, especially if they've got a lot of gap paces, you get a 15, 16-year-old who's going to start back in English at 1025, which is way down. You might find that they've done 2 or 3 paces, they now know what an adverb is, re-diagnose them. So the way you do that is you say to them, wow, you've been going so well. What I want you to do, remember this test you did? I'm going to give it back to you. Anything that is marked wrong in this test, I want you to rub out and see if you can get the right answer. And then I want you to see if some of the things that you couldn't answer, if you can now answer, because that can make a huge difference. You know, and particularly in math, if they didn't know their times table, then every single time they have division or multiplication, it's going to come up as a gap. If you can work that out, which you can't do if you're doing the onlines, this is why we say please don't do the onlines. If you can look at this and go, right, they don't know their times table, I am going to drill them on their times table and teach them their times table. Once they know their times table, I'm going to re-diagnose them. It's going to make a huge amount of difference to the amount of work that they have to do. They might have had 15 or 20 gap paces, and sometimes you can reduce that by up to half. So that's half the amount of work that that student needs to do. And you can re-diagnose them as many times as you want with that same method. Rub out anything that is marked wrong and then go as far as you can. And this is the way that you progress them through the system as quickly as possible. So let them learn the foundational knowledge and then push them up as far as you can, especially the older students, because otherwise they can really be quite old when they graduate. So the diagnostic tests are absolutely crucial to putting the children in the right place and then pushing them through the curriculum as quickly as we can, while still making sure that they have that firm foundation to build on. Okay, there's a lot of information in that. So are there any questions about diagnostic tests? Oh, we're all pretty clear on that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is we're going to have a look at diagnostic tests. So hopefully you have one in your school, and whoever's running your training there can show you what your diagnostic tests are like. Thank you.